Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so in light of the Phoenix movie, or I guess the Dark Phoenix film coming out, one of the questions that I get a lot is the question of who would win, Phoenix versus Galactus. Like, who would win between these two characters? This is kind of a funny situation because Marvel's done this really 3 times that I'm aware of. One of the first times was based on a what if story where Jean Grey fought Galactus and the battle was a stalemate. The second one was where Jean Grey fought Galactus in Marvel Generations and Galactus won. Then there's the third time, which is actually in continuity. The reason why I say Marvel Generations doesn't really seem to be in continuity is because 1, those were filler stories, and 2, like when Marvel Generations ended and we went into the post-Marvel landscape, or I guess going into Marvel Legacy, there was no reference of any kind really to Generations. So for the most part, it might as well have been treated like it didn't exist. But the story that's in continuity actually took place in Excalibur number 61. Now, at the time, this was Rachel Summers who possessed the power of the Phoenix and not Jean Grey. So I guess take it for what it's worth. For those of you guys who are unfamiliar with this, Rachel Summers has like a really weird history in Marvel Comics. So the idea behind this is that Rachel is the daughter of Cyclops and Jean Grey from the Days of Future Past reality, right? You know, where like where Maura McTaggart and Senator Robert Kelly and Professor Xavier were all assassinated, and that led to like the jump starting of the Sentinel program after the Supreme Court ruled that mutant registration was unconstitutional. And so because of that, Sentinels basically became self-aware. They became autonomous, and they came to the realization that because mutants are the next step in human evolution, that mutants are ineffectively human, you know, are in effect human. And as a result, they decided to enslave everyone, right? So like everybody in North America was basically held captive by Sentinels. You had a couple of resistance forces, like you had Wolverine in Canada, who was trying to lead a resistance force against the Sentinels. For the most part, it didn't matter. It didn't really make any difference. At the end of the day, I don't remember if they ended up nuking the Sentinels in Days of Future Past. I know that there was a tie-in for it with Secret Wars, although I didn't read it. But nonetheless, you know, the fact remains that at that point in time, in that future, Rachel had sent the mind of Kitty Pryde into the past, right? And said, like, your job is to find a way to stop this. Kitty Pryde successfully did it. But the question became, if Kitty Pryde's mind was sent into the past to stop a future that technically doesn't exist because of her actions, then how could she have gone back into the past in the first place, right? And so because of that, it ended up being that Rachel Summers' reality, the Days of Future Past, became an alternate universe where nothing was ever fixed. The assassination happened and all that kind of stuff took place, and so it didn't really make any difference. In an effort to figure out why, Rachel came basically back to the present day, right? Like to the point before her reality diverged and became a different universe. And that basically led to the events of Rachel Summers being thrown into the main Marvel universe. Now, a few things happened over the course. I mean, there were stories like Days of Future Present, right, where like a crazy Franklin Richards came back from the future as well. But Rachel Summers ended up joining Excalibur, the British superhero team. Some stuff took place, and then she became the new host for the Phoenix. So she's one of 3 people who successfully achieved the title of White Phoenix of the Crown, meaning they could use 100% of the Phoenix Force's powers. Of course, you have Jean, you have Rachel, and then I think it was Emma Frost. Either it was Emma Frost or Quentin Quire, maybe 4. And maybe maybe 4 people. Maybe the Quentin Quire achieved the White Phoenix of the Crown. Quentin Quire was a super powerful telepath, right? He used this drug called Kick in order to amp his powers up, basically steroids for mutants. But nonetheless, well, I guess mutant growth hormone is too, but regardless of the circumstance, during the events of Excalibur number 61, when Rachel Summers has the Phoenix, she ends up running into Galactus. And the way this plays out is she's just kind of flying through space, and she comes across this planet which is teeming with life, and like Galactus is feeding on it, right? And so the Phoenix is like, hey, you can't do that. This planet has people on it. You can't consume this world. And Galactus is like, but I can though, and I'm going to. And so basically like a fight breaks out between the two of them. Now, in this whole conflict that takes place, while Phoenix wins, it's not really due to overpowering Galactus, but it kind of is. The fight for the most part is pretty intense. It's a cosmic level fight, so like it's pretty hardcore. But basically what ends up happening is Galactus relents. And the reason for this is Galactus makes this statement, and he basically says, like, you are brimming with what's essentially infinite power, right? Like you possess an unlimited amount of power, so you can fight forever, whereas I cannot. I have to constantly replenish myself. And so it was really more that like Phoenix wore Galactus down in like a battle of attrition, as opposed to like overpowering him outright. So I imagine people will probably use that as a means to kind of split hairs and say, well, she didn't technically win, you know, so I want Galactus to win. But whatever the case is, in that particular scuffle, Phoenix came out on top, right? Like she essentially defeated Galactus. Now at the end of the day, Galactus, it was kind of crazy. Galactus made this interesting case where he basically said, like, you are the sum total of all life that has, does, currently does, and will ever exist in throughout the multiverse and the omniverse, right? And you know, Phoenix is like, yes. And he's like, okay. So basically, like, the universe is finite. It has a beginning point and it has an end point. You sustain yourself by essentially feeding on that life. And so you're basically doing what I'm doing, but on a much grander scale. People, like, there are beings in this universe that will not be born because you basically stripped them of the life that was needed in order to exist, right? So like, you prevented them from being born because you exist, more or less. It's weird, and it's kind of a finicky argument, and it's just sort of haphazard. And at the end of the day, the Phoenix ends up just kind of being like, oh my God, you're right. And then she just takes off, flies into space, and Galactus consumes the planet. But as far as I'm aware, and I could be wrong here. Again, I mean, I know a lot about Marvel, but I don't know everything. As far as I'm aware, that's the only real in-continuity fight between the Phoenix Force and Galactus that actually answers the question, right? I mean, you could go with Marvel Generations, you could go with What Ifs, but the issue with that is there's so many different variables, right? Like, there's no real classification or no real indication of how powerful that character is in relation to like the main Marvel universe, because that's the standard people use, right? Like, you know, right, wrong, or otherwise, people usually use that as a way to, one, either cook the books in favor of their argument, or two, use it as a means to provide like an actual sound argument. But the fact remains, like it's in this instance, it's not really an arguable or debatable point. It's simply just that like Galactus really more gave up than anything, right? Like Galactus was kind of like, I can't fight anymore, just was essentially exhausted and worn out. And that's because of the difference in the nature of their powers. One of the things to bear in mind when it comes to cosmic level beings, which is to say beings that can manipulate some form or the entirety of the universe using their own powers, you're talking about a level of power that's extreme. And 9 times out of 10, it would really just kind of boil down to a stalemate, right? Like, it's like saying you like 5 more than infinity. How do you have 5 more than infinity? Infinity goes on forever. When you're talking about a being that's powerful enough to turn planets into giant, you know, baseballs, and to turn stars into like giant lamps, you know, when you have a person that has that kind of power to essentially like fundamentally manipulate, control, and alter the very fabric of the universe itself and everything in it, how do you determine who's a victor on that? Like, how do you determine who wins? Like, I altered reality more than you did. I mean, I guess, you know, but it's one more reality altering, you know, I altered reality one more than you. It gets kind of weird, and it gets kind of crazy because it's such an extreme level of power. All it really comes down to is, can one like blink the other out of existence before the other one does that to them? I mean, I don't really know, because it's such an extreme level of power. Right? It's just, it's bonkers. I mean, you know, at that point, like for the average person looking at that, there's no differentiation. Now, for people of that level, there is kind of a degree, and this is really like where the difference comes into play, is Galactus has an insane amount of power, right? Like Galactus can do all kinds of things. He can recreate planets. He can create stuff out of thin air. I mean, he can alter the fabric of the universe if he wants to. He can resurrect people from the dead. We've seen him do that before, right? Like bring people back to life, bring things back to life, to transmute the physical structure of another being using nothing but his own power, right? I mean, you look at a being like Apocalypse, he uses technology to do that, right? Like Apocalypse creates his 4 horsemen by using celestial technology to modify their physical structure. He did the same thing with Mr. Sinister, right? Like Nathaniel Essex was just a normal guy, and then like Apocalypse uses power to like, you know, transform his physical form and turn him into Mr. Sinister. With Galactus, it's just a wave of his hand, you know, and then like Norrin Rad becomes a Silver Surfer. So when you're talking, I mean, that kind of power is extreme, right? But like, you look at the Phoenix, and it's basically all of that same power, except now it's limitless. And that's the difference, is Galactus's power is not limitless. It's not infinite, right? It's the nature of his character. It's his one weakness, that if Galactus goes long enough without feeding, one, he'll go into a frenzy, which is actually kind of cool. When you see Galactus like going like, when you see like a starved Galactus in the comics, like he goes balls out. Like it's cool to see him fight when he's in that state. He fought Thanos like that, actually. Thanos ended up overpowering him, but because it was, you know, he was so astronomically weak. But you know, when you look at a Galactus, like the weakness is that if he goes too long without eating, he'll actually die, right? Like his energies will just kind of cease to exist, because Galactus isn't really human. Galactus is composed of pure energy. That's why his form changes whenever he appears to a different race, right? Like they see him as a mirror of themselves. So if he showed up to like the Kree would see Galactus as like a giant Kree with a big purple helmet. But nonetheless, because of the fact that his powers are not finite, despite, with them being like as wild and capable as they will run out. Whereas the Phoenix is an infinite source of power. So long as everything that exists continues to exist, the Phoenix will continue to have an infinite source of power, because everything will die and then everything will be reborn. It would just have to be something where like everything just kind of ceases to exist, never to come back again, right? I mean, it's kind of crazy. Normally I don't like really using this as a source, but the Marvel Handbook kind of confirms, or really just outright confirms, the Phoenix being like an omniversal entity. So a lot of people were just kind of like, how do you make that justification? Well, because Marvel said it's true. So that's how we know it's true. But nonetheless, with that conflict, it's pretty straightforward and it's answered in the comics, right? I mean, it's there's, for the most part, a definitive answer there. I mean, I imagine there'll be some efforts to debunk it. I don't know how you really like debunk a factual explanation in a comic, unless you, I guess it's Marvel Comics is wrong, I'm right. In which case, I imagine you probably lose all credibility at that point. But nonetheless, it's one of those interesting battles that people ask for that we've already had an answer to. Now here's the thing: Marvel could shift that, and that's the important thing to bear in mind when it comes to comics. Things change on a whim, right? So just because something is a standard now does not mean it's a standard forever. It's just the way things work. Marvel could come along and have a story where like the Phoenix fights Galactus in continuity, which is to say in the existing universe, the main line of comics, and it's referenced to multiple times, and then like the Phoenix wins. So I mean, you could see it play out that way. It could happen any number of ways, but at the moment, in the interim right now, as far as I'm aware, and again, you could do your own research if you want to, but as far as I'm aware, the only time that Phoenix and Galactus fought in the main continuity, in Marvel's main continuity, was in Excalibur number 61, and the Phoenix won. The Phoenix basically outlasted Galactus. So anyway, answer to your question. Hopefully that gives you guys a good source to go to. If you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoy this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.